Last person I want to bring up here before a Q&A is a mom. And a mom who has experienced firsthand what Common Core is about in its full implementation. And here in Oklahoma, we are just tapping our foot in the water. So without further ado, my new friend, Kristal.
This is daunting. I'm not a public speaker, I'm a mom, so give me grace, please. Thank you, Joy, for inviting me, and thank you to all of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to come learn more about the new education reform. I'm honored to be here, and I'm honored to share our personal experience and critical information in regards to what is currently taking place, as you know, in the Oklahoma public schools. Please note the name Oklahoma Academic Standards has replaced the original name of Common Core. This is a deceptive renaming in order to perceive these standards as being state-led. Isn't that an oxymoron? How do you nationalize something and then consider it state-led? Me and my family, we personally experienced Common Core hands-on in the classroom. Our children actually attended a pilot school in Aurora, Colorado. We were there for 3 years. It was a P20 21st century school. We uprooted our family specifically to get away from Common Core in hopes to give our children a more traditional approach to education, specifically reading, writing, and math. What a tremendous difference it made in our children. In fact, it was a turning point for my 8-year-old. He soared and they soared because the traditional standards here were real and genuine. They were clear, they were exact. The major difference that we saw was that teachers here were actually teaching. They stopped, they took the time, and they valued every single student as an individual. So who says our current standards in Oklahoma are not already good, or great for that matter?
Amen.
And how many parents are lined up outside all of the administrator buildings demanding a major overhaul of the state standards? I'm going to read to you the definition of rigor. You will hear that often with the new standards. The definition of rigor is the difficult and unpleasant condition or experience that is associated with something. Harsh inflexibility in opinion, temper, or judgment. The quality of being unyielding or unflexible. An act or instance of strict severity or cruelty. A condition that makes life very difficult, challenging, or uncomfortable. This is what they want our children to do. I'm also going to read the definition of common. Common is done by many people, occurring or appearing frequently, widespread, general, characterized by a lack of privilege or special status, falling below ordinary. That's the definition of common. I can tell you about 3 months ago, I started noticing Common Core materials come home again when I was making copies for the teachers. I started asking the teachers. They were reluctant to talk, mainly because I knew they were in fear of their jobs, but the consensus was that they felt Common Core was not practical and they knew the testing was excessive. I then began to ask some of the parents around Oklahoma, and not a single parent I approached had heard the words Common Core. This is exactly the same thing that happened to us 3 years ago in Colorado. Nobody knew about this slow progression of Common Core. It somehow snuck itself in, secretly, quietly. Now, if these standards are so great, then why are we having to secretly implement them?
Amen.
Now that I began seeing Common Core here in Oklahoma, I demanded answers, and I knew I was going to have to protect my children, and I had to find out what my options were. I contacted the administrators and the superintendents, and I had a heart-to-heart with them, and explained all of our past hands-on experience with Common Core. I divulged all of the detrimental aspects of what Common Core actually did physically and mentally to my children. Their response was, these are nationally mandated standards. Unfortunately, we don't have much choice. This is a law. We must abide. Quite frankly, I was very disappointed in all of their lack of concern. My parents always told me that if all my friends were jumping off a bridge, that I was not supposed to jump too. I am a leader. I am not a follower.
Amen.
I have been raised to stand up for my values, even if I stand alone. Well, I went ahead and printed off the standards off of the OK.gov website, and due to major time constraints, I do not have time to go over. They're thousands of pages long. I figured I would just start at the kindergarten level. Please note, I'm going to talk about kindergarten math first. This is considered new math. It's also known as front-end estimation or integrated math. I suggest you write down the term and Google it tonight. By the way, new math is subjective math. It is not objective. This means it takes a strictly an abstract approach to reasoning. Now let me turn to that page and I will read to you the mathematic practice standards for kindergarten and our 5-year-olds. Number 1, make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. Number 2, reason abstractly and quantitatively. Number 3, construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. Use appropriate tools strategically, attend to precision, look for and make use of structure, and look for and express regularity in repeated reasoning. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't understand how this can be expected of 5-year-olds when me as an adult, I have a hard time even grasping some of those concepts. Let me tell you what did happen to my 5-year-old. I had one, and he went through this. And by the way, he is very good with math and numbers. He began to absolutely hate school, he hated math, and he became very discouraged. He started having anxiety issues. He refused to get out of my car when I dropped him off. He would have stomach aches, frequent headaches, and he would ask me, "Mom, do I have to go to school today?" In kindergarten. He felt like a failure, and quite frankly, as parents, so did we. He could not grasp the concepts, and it did not take very long for him to completely shut down. They kept telling us, the teachers and administrators as parents, that this was supposed to be critical thinking, deeper thinking, but we knew differently, because due to the frustration, there was no critical thinking. He wasn't thinking at all. Children this age are not mentally capable, nor are their brains physically developed enough to understand abstract subjective reasoning, which is why typically algebra has never been introduced till near the 8th grade. Now they start this entire process in kindergarten. They haven't even learned the basic math facts or fundamental number concepts. Now talk about getting the cart before the horse.
Amen.
Let's talk about the writing standards. This is the main emphasis on Common Core. The writing part of Common Core happened to be the most difficult standard for my kindergartner. The main reason is because kindergartners are not independent learners and they need lots of guidance from their teachers. How many 5-year-olds do you know can actually write in complete sentences with punctuation and all? Most importantly, it is very difficult for them to be able to write when they cannot read fluently. My son had not mastered his letter sounds, his sight words, even writing his full name, and yet they wanted him to write complete thoughts and full sentences with immense details. I will read to you the research to build and present knowledge for writing. Number 1, write arguments to support claims and an analysis of substantive topic or text using valid reasoning and relevant and sufficient evidence. Number 2, write informative, explanatory text to examine and convey complex ideas and information clearly and accurately through the effective selection, organization, and analysis of content. I won't go into the rest. There's 10. Again, the main focus, like I said, is to encourage students to write lengthy, detailed stories, and yet many of them still cannot read independently. My son was expected to write personal narratives and sometimes even progressive poetry and link the events exactly as they occurred. 5-year-olds are not able to think literally in regards to time. That's why they get things mixed up. Like today, yesterday, even 5 minutes ago, 5-year-olds have a hard time with. I can tell you firsthand there was not one student in my child's class who could comprehend what the teacher was expecting of them. This again created anxiety and stress on not just our son, but the whole class and the teacher. My son began again to refuse to try to get out of bed in the morning. He was completely terrified, thinking he was going to have to go to school and write more papers with more details which he did not comprehend. I compare it to teaching a 2-month-old how to walk.
Yeah.
They just are not developmentally capable, and kids this age have not been alive long enough, nor do they have enough life experience to even remotely relate to any of these standards. Now let's move on to reading. The anchor standards for reading are number 1, read closely to determine what the text says explicitly and make logical inference from it. Cite specific textual evidence when writing or speaking to support conclusions drawn from the text. interpret words and phrases as they are used in a text, including determining technical, connotative, and figurative meaning, and analyze how the specific word choice shapes the meaning or tone, and integrate and evaluate content presented in diverse media and formats, including visual and quantitative, as well as the words. Now, it's bad enough when children start out distraught at the very beginning level of school. And we as parents, me and my husband, knew with our first child that there was something not quite right, but we just could not pinpoint it. However, when our daughter, the natural learner, began down the same exact pattern and started absolutely hating school, it was then that we knew something was wrong. When we moved here to Oklahoma, the 2020 hindsight vision was even brighter because the schools here were not doing this yet. My children grew by 3 academic years after we moved here. We've only lived here a year. Let me explain now, older students, how this is going to affect 3rd through 12th graders. Because this fall, like Linda said, August 2014, all Oklahoma schools in all grades are mandated to implement these standards 100%. And you see there's a major problem called a gap, and it is huge. Imagine if a child has been taught only a traditional approach his entire life, and that's known as a fact-based approach to learning, and now what happens when they are only tested on the new transitional subjective materials. Let me give you an example scenario. Let's say I teach you in this room for 5 to 10 years all about airplanes, the makes, the models, the engines, you name it. You've studied, you put forth your best effort for 10 years to master the entire product line. Now it's time to take the final test, which is an EOI exam, which stands for End of Instruction, in order to actually graduate. Your boss now will hand you a test with questions only related to automobiles. Yes, it's still the same mode of transportation, it's just not the same specific mode that you were told to master. How would you feel? What is your success rate? What is your test score? Do you see where the gap lies? Yet this is a huge problem, and nobody who's implementing this has thought about this. And now by this age, your child understands the overwhelming pressure to perform on this one test, and his sights are on college. In fact, the End of Instruction test counts for everything in order to graduate. One single test is going to determine whether or not this child moves on, regardless. They might be a straight A student, they might just have major test anxiety, they might even be overcoming challenges at home. It doesn't matter. Those factors don't matter. Now what? Let me also mention that just this past spring, they changed the grading scale known as a cut score. So now in order to receive that same A, you must get a 95 or higher. Isn't that motivating? This is a top-down approach, as we've discussed. Essentially, the federal government mandates to the states that they teach a transitional progressive approach as opposed to the traditional or academic approach that we have been teaching. The state in turn holds the State Board of Education accountable, who holds our superintendent accountable to our principal, and the principal dictates down further to our teachers. We give up all local decision making in order to decide what and how these students are going to learn, as well as what content needs to be implemented in order to pass the high stakes standards test. As most of you know, the education industry has been making these changes for decades. By this point, most educators are numb and they assume years from now we will just be rediscussing another education reform. Well, that may be true, except prior to now, we did not have big key players such as Bill Gates and other special interest private corporations. Bill Gates has created all of the software programs designed, as Jenny said, which is going to streamline this entire process. Technology is the game changer. In the past, no matter what educational reform took place, the school district had the ability to filter a lot of the information. Unfortunately, when all these standards eventually become streamlined, the student, as what we physically witnessed in Colorado, they sit in front of a computer with headphones on. This is not teaching, and there is no ability to filter what is coming across that computer screen. This is exactly why even the private Christian schools and homeschoolers will be affected, because it's all software-based.
That's right.
These same computerized tests will be recreated to meet Common Core standards, and they will be administered to all students. All students have to take state tests in order to get accepted into college. Do you really think they're going to create a completely separate test for all of those people who chose not to implement it? How will a private Christian school or homeschooled student get into college without passing one? The SAT and ACT is currently being rewritten.
That's right.
Do you see why we have little options and why we have to fight this top-down approach? My point is this: as parents, it's our duty to protect our children, especially because school already has enough challenges. If we don't fight for our kids, then who will? I'm not waiting around to see the bottom drop out again and regret ever speaking up about everything we've already lived through. There is a major difference between teaching and educating. There's a difference between being smart and being wise, and there's a major difference between learning versus knowing. Teachers are also being evaluated based off these student test scores. Of course, I am all for accountability, but how does this ensure that the teacher is essentially being effective? There are many factors involved. I know kids in my children's class that are poor test takers. I know some of them are going through horrible divorce situations at home. I know some people who've even just had people pass away in their family, or even the death of a pet will affect a 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old. There are financial difficulties, and last spring there was a huge example when I proctored exams of a child who fell asleep because bad storms kept him up all night long. How does that constitute an effective teacher? Teachers and students are way more valuable than any kind of quantifiable data or test score. What teachers do is priceless. They change and they mold lives.
That's right.
Not to mention now, because I volunteer a lot in the classroom, I see behind the scenes how much time teachers are having to spend in meetings, shuffling paperwork, and doing administrative reporting duties instead of being able to focus on teaching.
Amen.
Common Core to me is like a disease. It is a slow, progressive, cancerous tumor that is growing inside of our schools right now. We can't just fight to get rid of high-stakes testing because the standards themselves actually drive the curriculum and drive the testing.
That's right.
We have to remove the root of the problem, not just alleviate the symptoms. Bottom line, Common Core in short amount of time has already proved to fail. You can just look at any other state, Colorado, New York, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky. And quite frankly, my child is not a robot that I send to school to be programmed to pass tests.
Amen.
If my child, or any child for that matter, is not engaged, they lose interest. Whatever happened to curiosity, adventure, and resilience? Should we be training and programming our students to just pass tests, or should we be inspiring them? Plus, I'd really like to have the somebody define college and career ready. How do these standards guarantee that for every student, especially after years of high-stakes testing? Are you telling me that if my child doesn't go off to college to receive a college degree that he is not considered successful? Is the hardworking farmer that farms 400 acres, the fireman, the business owner, or even a military helicopter pilot down the street not successful?
Amen.
It takes so much more than an opinion-based standard of college and career ready to convince me. I don't buy it. I refuse to sit back and watch every child's joy for learning and every teacher's joy for teaching be taken away. We are created to do so much more. I am really sad for the kids, too, in our community, the neighborhood children who will never know the beauty of a good inspirational classic literature novel because it's going to be far more important to read informational text like an EPA guideline. I'm sad for the kids who will always think that understanding a mathematical process was more important than getting an accurate answer. I sure don't want to ride in the car that kid is going to engineer.
Amen.
More importantly, I do not want them administering my medical dosages when I'm in my retirement. Now, if these are the standards and expectations in kindergarten, you can only imagine how they rise and climb from there. As a parent, I attempt to rationalize why a national standard will expect my 5-year-old to be thoroughly engaging, clear, precise, and informative and instructive in every single aspect, but yet nearly every element of the grading assessments, the evaluations, and the curriculum are nothing but ambiguous, rhetorical, and vague. I'm all about setting standards, but we must have concrete, realistic standards that are attainable as well as measurable. By rigorous, what they mean is excessive in workload, because we know once Common Core gets started and really rolling here in Oklahoma, you can go ahead and expect tons of extra homework. The standards truly become introductions because there's no time in class to make sure children are grasping these concepts, which means little to no repetition and there's no retention. Teachers were once able to inspire and motivate students to become passionate, creative, innovative thinkers, but now they are strictly facilitating scripted standards, literally, due to the benchmarks and modules that they have to check off. I suggest you ask your child's teacher how overwhelming all of this is. They're essentially double teaching. Especially here in Oklahoma, I've noticed the traditional education teachers are going back to overcompensate, and I say thank you. My kids need that. Benchmark after benchmark, moving through this at a rapid pace, teachers have no choice but to go through the motions. There's no time to teach anymore, you see. We have lots of rigorous standards to achieve. Our children lose their individuality, and most important, teachers lose their flexibility. It's called the race to nowhere, and the good teachers and the good leaders that really want to teach either retire or quit. How many teachers and principals just quit or retired in your own school district?
That's right.
At our school, we had 12, and we've had 4 new principals in the last 3 years, out of 8 schools that I know of. Oklahoma is currently in the baby steps of transitioning into Common Core, but it's already having a huge impact on our community. I could spend hours and hours up here sharing with you my story, and I could give you detail after detail about our personal story and other major facts because I've been doing lots of research and fighting this for over 4 years. This is a very complex national education reform. I suggest you go home and do your research. Back on October 14th of last year, I started this journey here in Oklahoma. Since then, I've been receiving emails and phone calls daily from parents, teachers, and students all over. I have a few brave souls that actually came here with me tonight because they wanted to share their stories too. Teachers and parents all over the nation are standing up and speaking out. What's alarming is that if you go and YouTube the stories, they're all the same. Every parent, every teacher, every student has the same story. What the legislators and the proponents think is happening with these standards and what is actually happening in the classroom are 2 different things. I chose a presentation to do at the end here, and I chose a very specific song to go along with the end of my presentation because I think that what these standards forget the most is that these are children. They forget that these students are young, they forget that they are vulnerable, and they forget that they are human beings with feelings who are striving to do their best, to be everything they can be, everything but common, and they deserve more than rigor. They are not machines. These are our children, and they are God's children.
Amen.